Hello everyone, welcome back to the winner's show match. So here this is game two. In the previous game, I mentioned that this would be a best of four match. So this is again another 10 plus 0 game with the colors reversed. So now Junior Fried Rice has the white pieces and DootchMann or Mary has the black pieces. So in the previous game, essentially, Junior Fried Rice had an advantage in the opening due to the dubiousness at which Mary was playing. But at the critical position, they failed to take advantage of it and allowed white to equalize in that game. And afterwards, black still insisted on having an attack, but um, white just defended well, and the game ended soon after. So here in the second game, now white has the now Jennifer Ice has the white pieces, which means it's going to be a lot easier to try and get an attack in, especially if DootchMann continues to play in a dubious flanking style instead of taking a claim in the center. So we'll see how things go. Let's see. So this game starts with a more principled opening with e4, but that's only the first move because black replies with a5. So this is the ware defense. If I remember correctly, I think both a5 and h5 are both called the ware defense. Is it? No, this is the goldsmith defense. But where likes to play these kinds of flank pawns. That's why this a5 move is called the ware defense. So a5 is not really much to be said about that move. It's just moving a pawn on the flank. D4, good move, principle. When your opponent plays on the flank, you want to stake a claim in the center. And if your opponent does nothing, plays very passively, you want to try and get the ideal development setup, get your king castle, and then just be happy because your pieces are pointing everywhere and your pawns are controlling the center very well. So b6, so we are starting to see what black's idea is. Black wants to play a shark fin-like structure. So for those who aren't aware, the shark fin structure is basically what we in Guracord call a variation of the monkey's defense, or the modern defense, sorry, where you play something like d6, d6, knight f6, g6, bishop g7, bishop d7, something like that. So that would be something like a shark fin opening because of this structure. Like, it looks a bit like a fish, like this is the tail and this part is the head, this part is the head and this part is the tail, something like that. But basically, it's a very modern kind of idea where you allow white to build up a center and then try to develop your pieces onto the flanks and try to attack the center if white allows it. So knight f3, very good, continuing to just develop pieces into the center, getting ready to castle. Bishop d7, following through with the plan, attacking the e4 pawn. So both sides are going through with their plans, by going with a more principled, classical, develop into the and stake a claim in the center kind of plan, whereas black is playing a more modern sort of spending a little bit of time to attack on the flanks kind of move. So here knight c3 was played, is fine. Just defending the pawn. So e6. Now trying to develop the dark square bishop to apply some more pressure onto the king side, onto the center. Sorry. So here black probably thinks that instead of going for the typical sharp-in structure, maybe it's a bit too slow. So therefore, black tries to go for a more quicker plan with something like e6 and bishop to b4 to prevent any d4 or d5 or e5 ideas from white, because that could if for example instead maybe g6 was played, then maybe after developing the bishops, something like d5 or maybe e5, depending on which bishop white wants to shut out, and that could potentially prove to be too much for black to handle. So instead, e6 was played to develop the bishop more quickly. Bishop f4, so attacking this slightly weak square. Bishop b4, applying pressure now onto this knight. And here, the threat is to take this e4 pawn. Unfortunately, white fails to recognize this. Maybe a better move would be something like bishop to d3, simply defending this pawn an extra time, and then the game will probably continue very normally with some development, like for example knight f6, and then attacking the pawn once again. And now white will be forced to play knight d2, so defending the pawn many times, and then perhaps something like maybe d6 first, preparing to develop the knight and potentially apply more pressure onto the e5 pawn. And then white will try to force matters with a3 here, and then bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and then something like this, maybe castling, maybe developing the knight. And here, um, I think this would be roughly equal. Maybe white is slightly better because of the more space and more active pieces, but this would probably be the way to go for both sides. But instead, over here in this position, white plays a3 immediately, and this is not sufficient for all the reasons that we have mentioned in our previous analysis live streams. So a3 forces issues. You're forcing black to make a decision. Now this only works if black has equal or bad decisions only. But in this case, this a3 move doesn't really force black to do anything that black doesn't want to do, because black's threat is to capture this e4 pawn because of this pin on the knight over here. So by forcing a3, you're spending a move to let black do what black really wants to do, which is bishop takes c3, eliminating the defender and then capturing the e4 pawn. So a3 is basically a waste of tempo at this point. So black managed to win the pawn, and then succeeded in justifying all of these slow moves earlier. A5, b6, bishop to b7, like all of these slow moves were meant to chip away at the center from the sidelines, and black managed to do that. So black is now a little bit better because black has succeeded in their plan, and white has failed in their plan of controlling the center because one of the central pawns is lost. So queen to e2, applying pressure onto this bishop and defending the c2 pawn. Bishop back to b7. You don't want to think too much about where to place the bishop. Alternatively, you can also develop the knight because the knight defends the bishop. And here, queen to c4 was played, and we have reached the position in the thumbnail. It was in the previous position here. Many moves have been tried by Lee chess players, including c4, trying to control the center a bit more on the queen side. Maybe something like queen to e5, maybe trying to queen to e5, trying to put some pressure here. Now that the dark square bishop is gone, moves like queen d3 have also been played, trying to make some space for the light square bishop to develop, or maybe something like queen b5 for with the same idea, or maybe even g3 and developing the bishop this way. All these moves have been played before, but queen c4 is a novelty. No moves have been played before, and it's as of move 9 this time that we have a completely new Lee chess game. So this move here tries to pile up on this c7 square, which appears to be what Junior Fried Rice likes to do. They seem to like to attack this c pawn or from both black and white. On both occasions, I think pressure has been applied onto this pawn. However, this c pawn here is not as weak as the f pawn. The f pawn is a far weaker pawn in the early stages of the game because only the king is defending it. So in this case here, the queen is defending the pawn. So that makes a bit of a difference because the queen is more strong in the early games. So this pressure here might not seem as much. Um, in fact, objectively, queen e5 to take advantage of the bishop this way would have been a slightly more accurate way of playing, forcing something like f6, and then you can play queen takes c7. So you have two threats over here in this position where you're attacking the c7 pawn as well, but you're also attacking the g7 pawn. So that's why this knight c4 idea was perhaps a little bit inaccurate, because after playing d6, now shutting out the dark square bishop, all of the pressure onto the c pawn is basically relieved, and black can even play something like knight c6 if it's really needed. although black would probably prefer to develop the knight this way instead, and potentially develop here or something like that in the future. So with the dark square bishop gone, what black wants to do is to put all the pawns on dark squares, put all the pawns on dark squares somehow, and then have the light square bishop have a lot of scope and block out this dark square bishop and try and make white's bishop pair useless. So instead, bishop g5 was played, recognizing that this diagonal has no future. So now we try to move over to a more active diagonal and attack the queen instead. And here, black defends with the most natural looking move, knight f6. But this is in fact an inaccuracy for a very specific reason. So this is a critical position. So I would like you to take a few seconds to pause the video or perhaps analyze this position to figure out why the most natural move in this position is not the right way to go. So I'll give you a few seconds. Alright, so remember earlier, the whole point of developing the queen here to c4 and developing the bishop is to apply pressure onto this c7 square. So, developing the knight here to f6 is an inaccuracy because in this position, if bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6, if you want to preserve your structure, you actually lose this c7 pawn because that was what the queen was guarding. So the queen was a bit overloaded, and if you try and trick queens with something like queen e7, you can even take the opportunity to take advantage of the open squares around the white king over here and play something like bishop f5, bishop b5 check, king f8, getting the king to safety, and queen takes b6, so winning back the pawn. And now in this position, white is actually the one up material. It's still fairly balanced. Actually, I think yeah, it's still fairly balanced in this position, but I think black has the advantage of having a more easy, safer position, as in the sense that the structure is more the structure is better. The king is safe now, and you can try and take advantage of these pawns, I guess. But the nice thing about white's position, which is why white is very slightly better, is that white's king is also actually very safe. There's actually no real way for black to access the white king, and white can easily castle on either side. And these two active pieces actually try and inhibit black's piece development. So, for example, this knight can't really develop very easily because of the pressure on the light squares. So you can see that all of the squares that the knight can go to are controlled by both the queen and the bishop. So it's going to be a bit tough. But of course, it's not too much of an advantage because black can simply just take here and then try and develop the knight somewhere like this, and black is completely fine. So this would have been a critical position, and here, since we don't want to lose this c pawn, maybe g takes f6 would have been more accurate to keep the material. But in this position, again, it is very equal. But here, black has more of an edge because of the extra pawn, and sort of the fact that the black king is perfectly safe here on e7, and the white king is a bit exposed here with this ruptured pawn structure. So yeah, let's get back to the game. So knight f6 was played, but white did not manage to find bishop takes f6. Instead, white decided to retreat and to try to develop with bishop e2 and prepare to castle. So bishop knight b to d7 was played, now defending the knight with another knight, and now this threat is no longer an issue. White decides to just castle, get the king to safety first, but this fails to bishop to a6, so skewering the queen and the bishop. And now this bishop is protected by the rook, and there is no way for the white queen to actually maintain control over the light square bishop, so you can't actually protect the light square bishop. And the thing is, right, you can't even make any threats at the same time, and because all the pieces are defended, all of the pieces in black's camp are defended, and everything is very very solid, which is the advantage of some of the modern setups. If you don't open things up early, if you don't play moves like d5 e5 early, then maybe black can get a very solid setup, since black has spent less time extending and more time keeping all the pieces back, so it's easy to defend. Everything is a bit more compact. So here, the ideal way to play, or the objective move to play, is to just simply um, give up the queen with the queen takes a6, rook takes a6, bishop takes a6, and here at least you get the rook and piece for the queen. So material wise, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Of course, black is still completely winning here because there's still a lot of pawns on the board. The knights are still very strong. The queen can get very strong very soon, and the rooks can't really do much because of all the pawns on the black side. Like black still has all of their pawns. Still has all of their pawns. But instead, white decides that keeping the queen is the best form of counterplay. So instead, queen c6 was played, trying to put the queen into a more infiltrating square. However, this doesn't really work even remotely because of bishop takes e2, and now both the rook and the knight are attacked. So you can see that white doesn't have time to actually create any new threats or generate any initiative. Um, bishop takes f6 was played to attack the queen over here, and g takes f6 was played because of this pin over here. The knight couldn't retake. Rook f to e1, trying to gain momentum, gain initiative, lining up with the king. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, rook g8. So now black is trying to claim that this open g file is advantageous for black, and the king is perfectly safe in the center. Well, even if it was not, black can still play queen to e7 and castle queenside, because this structure is also very solid. So here c4 was played. Perhaps if in the case of queen e7 castles, then maybe there might be some c5 shenanigans that might go on. C5 stopping any of that, sort of closing down the queen side, preparing to attack on the king side. C3 was played, supporting this pawn. Rook c8, preparing in the case of takes, and then you can just capture this c4 pawn. So maybe I can put it on the board. Maybe not. Rook e4. Rook e4 was played, defending the fourth rank, and also potentially doubling up and attacking on the king side. Queen to e7, preparing perhaps to enable an escape route for the king, but it's a bit scary putting your queen and king in front of a rook. But the idea is to allow your king to escape and potentially activate your queen this way instead. So d5 was played, trying to open things up and exploit this pin, which is a good try, but white black here simply plays e5 to shut things down in the center, shut things down on the queen side, and now all of the play will be focused on the king side, which is exactly what black wants, because that is where black is stronger. Here, here perhaps there was an opportunity for white to recognize the threats that black was trying to execute. So for example, we have mentioned a few plans. If things go bad, black will try to run the king. If there is time, uh, black might try to double up the rooks with something like rook g6, and then hide the king, and rook g8. That takes a lot of time. Another idea for black would be to activate the queen. It's something like queen f8, queen f6. There's also a long-term plan to activate the queen and attack the king side. But the most pressing threat and the most pressing idea from black has to be f5. F5 is very strong, gaining more space, trying to push away the defenders from the white side, and to develop the queen much more quickly this way, and the knight. So if f5 will be able to be played, black will be in an even more overwhelming position, because black will be able to develop the queen very quickly, develop the knight, and get all the pieces into the attack very very quickly, and everything will be accelerated by the move f5. F5 hastens queen development, knight development, and king development, and rook development. So everything will be enhanced with this f5 move. That is the importance of this f5 move. So therefore, white has to try to what ideas do white has? So white also has ideas of perhaps doubling up the rooks and perhaps infiltrating the queen. But most importantly, white has to try and stop f5 and or try and play f4 themselves to in order to open up the center before it's too late, because black has more pieces, black has the material advantage, and black has the advantage attacking into the king side. So white has to try and create counterplay in the center as soon as possible and try to exploit the weak king. So moves that could have done that were moves like queen h3 or queen f5. Queen f5 isn't so accurate because of rook g5, and then you have to move away to queen h3 anyway, and then f5 can be played because the rook is defending the pawn, and then black will be much better here. But queen h3 right away serves it is warrants some calculation, because it allows f4 to be played very quickly. It defends f5 and it sort of dissuades f5 from black themselves. So in this position, black can still play f5, and after queen captures, maybe something like knight f6 can be played. So now the pieces are getting into action. But at least in this position, white is able to play something like f4 and maybe try and open things up, maybe double up rooks, and maybe have a bit more of a chance in this variation. But instead, rook to g4 was played, sort of perhaps suggesting that if you trade rooks, then maybe I have some chances of infiltrating and picking up pawns over here, and maybe I have some chances over here. But instead, queen to f8 was played, saying that if you take, I am the one who wants to gain control over the g file over here. So I am the one who will gain anything from it. Queen to f5 was played, now preventing f5 and preparing f4 from white. But rook takes g4, queen takes g4, and king to e7. So now black is ready once again to contest the g file, and perhaps in the future play f5 themselves. So rook to e1, once again bringing pieces to the center. White really has to play f4 at some point. White really has to play f4 at some point. Queen to g8 was played, trying to trade queens because black is up material. You want to trade down materials. So queen back to f5, preventing f5 from black. Queen to g6, trying to trade queens. Queen to h3, maintaining control over the f5 square and also applying a bit of pressure onto this h7 pawn. So rook to g8 now, lining up and preventing the queen from moving anywhere, because it is tied down to defending this mate threat on g2. G3 was played to enable the queen to continue applying pressure. F5 finally executed by black, and now the idea is to play F4, take advantage of this structure over here to open things up and take advantage of the pin. So F3 was played to try and, I guess, prevent E4. I'm not sure, but this is weakening, since we know that the idea of this f5 move is to play f4 and to try and perhaps take or even apply even more pressure onto this g file otherwise. But playing f3 weakens this structure, so you are weakening you're weakening the g pawn, that is basically the only shelter the king has. So you're weakening the shelter by playing f3 when if you wanted to try and if white wanted to try and get counterplay in the center, a better try would be to play something like f4 and force black to play e4 to close things up. So in this variation, then at least you have sort of negated the power of the double pawns. You have halted any advances from any pawn storms from black. Of course, black is still much stronger after something like maybe knight f6, and then maybe bringing the pieces in this way, or perhaps moving queen to g4 over here, trying to trade pieces or infiltrate even. Black is still much better, but here I guess white will have a greater chance. But after f3, now black is able to execute their plan with f4, and then white is forced to play g4 to try and close things up. But it's too little, too late because of knight f6, and now you can even potentially sack your piece Over here, knight takes g4, queen takes g4, queen trade, pawn takes, rook takes, and the resulting endgame is better for black with the overwhelming lead in material and the better structure overall. So king to f2 first, getting out of the pin, queen g5, queen to g2, I guess just maintaining control over the g file, maybe ideas of rook g1 in the future. But rook g1 would allow something like e4 from black. In which case, I would say the queen was better placed on g6. Right, okay. Rook to g6, trying to infiltrate this way. So h3 was played to try and solidify this structure, protect this g pawn. Queen to h4 check, king f1. Perhaps king to f2 to run away might have been a more natural idea. But after queen to f1, rook h6, threatening to capture this h3 pawn. Now this may look like a blunder because of g5, but rook to h6 is actually one of the best moves because it forces white to play g5 and it forces white to open up. So white no longer has a choice to keep things close and pray for a draw, but rather white has to take the opportunity to win back the knight with g5, rook to g6, temporarily protecting the knight by attacking the queen. G takes f6 check anyway because it comes to check, you can just capture it. King takes f6, queen to h1, and now you can see that the floodgates are opening. Now black has control over the g file, and this g file is the entryway to the white king. And perhaps if the king were on f2 instead of on e2 instead of f1, the king will be a bit more safe because maybe you can hide somewhere here. But on f1, it looks extra vulnerable because the rook cannot contest the g file right away. So rook to g3 was played, attacking both pawns, applying pressure that trying to overwork the queen. King to e2, running away now. Rook takes h3, queen to f1, now protecting this pawn. Rook to h2 check. King d1, rook to f2, applying pressure on the queen, attacking this pawn over here. So queen h1, trying to just trade pieces down and maintain control over this f pawn. Queen takes h1, rook takes h1, king to g7, defending this h7 pawn first. Rook to h3, defending the f pawn. Rook to a2, attacking this loose pawn over here, and there's no way to defend that pawn. So after a4, rook takes a4. a4 is a bit unnecessary because it only made things tougher in the sense that if after a4 and rook takes a4, now there's no way to defend this c pawn either. Whereas if the pawn was still on a3, then at least you can spend some time with your king to defend this c pawn on c3 over here. Instead, after taking rook takes a4, king c2 was played, and now this pawn is also lost. But black decides to play rook to a2 instead because perhaps black wants to keep the rook active. He doesn't want to trap the rook somewhere in an awkward square over here because after rook takes here, there might be ideas of perhaps playing king to b3, and now the rook has no real squares to go to. Yeah. So to prevent the rook from getting trapped, instead rook to a2 check was played instead. King b3 attacking the rook, and rook to f2 back to applying pressure on this f pawn, so tying down the rook. The king to a4, trying to infiltrate and capture these pawns over here. Rook to c2, attacking these pawns, trying to get the king to come back. King to b5, so willing to trade pawns. But since black is up material, black is happy to trade any time of the day. Rook takes c3, king to c6, which is a bit unusual. Um, Perhaps trying to capture this d6 pawn to create a pass pawn, but that is a little bit too slow. Maybe capturing the b pawn, but that doesn't work either. You can just push the a pawn. So it's already dead loss at this position, so you can't really blame white for any moves that white makes. Uh, a4 was played, so basically now this is a pass pawn. Pass pawns must be pushed, and there is only one way to defend against queening. So rook h1 immediately, a3 is played anyway. King takes d6, trying to create a pass pawn. a2 was played. King e7, trying to clear a pass pawn. Rook takes f3. So maybe here a faster way to win would perhaps be, not sure actually. Oh, I guess the idea, yeah, I think actually the fastest way would be to just play rook c2, maybe rook c2, c, rook c2. No. Fastest way would simply be to play rook b3, right? Because for some reason I thought the pawn could capture here. Um, but yeah, just play rook b3, and if d6, you can play rook b1, and then there's no way to stop queening. So the only move is rook to a2, rook to a1, and then after you can either choose to trade, or you can play something like, maybe that's not the fastest. No, that's not the fastest. If you take here to go here, I should have seen this line before. I thought it was an easy win, but that's why I didn't analyze it. But now that more that I look at it, it's not as simple as I thought. Okay, this doesn't work because white actually has a threat. White has a threat of playing rook g1 check, and the king is forced to the h file, maybe h8, and then king takes f7, and now white is in danger. Black is in danger. So there is no time to queen because of a checkmate threat. So maybe something like h6 or h5 has to be played to make space. Maybe h6 is more accurate. h6, rook g8 check, and now there's a perpetual over here, so you can't get out of the checks. So h5 is not as accurate because h5 is not as accurate because you can attack the h pawn, and the king is covering everything. There's no way to defend this pawn, and it will be mate in one. So there is still venom in the position. That's why you can't play slow moves. In that sense, yeah, I guess rook f3 is the best move. Rook takes f3 is the best move because now there is no rook g1 check. You can defend with your rook, and you are still prepared to queen if rooks are traded. Okay, so d6 was played, trying to just push the pass pawn. Rook to d3, keeping an eye on the pass pawn. Check, king h6. So not going to h8 because you want to get more squares in case you get checkmated. Rook to no, king f6. Rook takes d6 with check. Um, Perhaps a better try would be just push. Okay, king to f6, maybe trying to threaten some checkmate threats, but rook takes d6 comes with check, king takes e5, attacking the rook, rook to d4, defending the pawn. I'm also attacking this pawn. King rook h1 check, king g5, getting to the center, rook g1 check, pushing the king back, king h4, and here rook a1 is played. Maybe trying to get the king in might have been an option. You have to find some counterplay at some point. But it's a bit too little too late, I guess, because after rook a1, f3, rook takes a2, king g3, and now the pawn can be supported and queen, and there's no way to actually stop the pawn from queening anymore. So rook a8, trying to get behind the king, but this double pawn is actually serving to it's actually proving useful because it's actually shielding the f pawn. So after f2, rook g8 check, king f3, and there's no way to actually make any further checks, any meaningful checks at least. So rook g7, rook h4 was played just in case to defend the pawn and as well as shield the king from any checks. Rook takes h7, f1 queen, and pretty much is a force mate very quickly because of The pawns helping out, restricting the king, and the king is in the center. The rook is really on a very nice place, and you can see the mate happening very soon after king d5, queen d3 check, king c6. Of course, there are quicker mates, but we don't need to look at those. Both sides are spending very little time. Black in this position has 30 seconds, roughly 30 seconds, and white once again has a rough and black once again in this position has roughly 3 minutes, and white has roughly 30 seconds, so not much time is spent. Rook check, king b5, queen takes h7, win the rook first, make things simple. King a6 trying to run away, but b5 check, discovery from the rook, forcing the king to move upwards. And then after queen b1 check, king takes c5, queen b6 check, king d5, and it is checkmate in one. So queen d6 checkmate was played, and it was in this position that black won by checkmate. So essentially, Meridian or DootchMann has a significant lead in the match by winning two games, and the match is still not over though because it is a best of four. Meridian still has to win one more game in order to win the match, but definitely a 2 point lead is definitely a significant advantage. So I've seen the next game already, and I think it's the most epic and closest game between the two of them. So keep an eye out for that video, and I think this is all for now. So thanks for watching, and see you all in the next one.